Have you ever imagined a world where Europe and Africa are connected by vast stretches of new land, where energy shortages are a thing of the past, and where the Mediterranean Sea as we know it is changed forever? But behind the veil of these proposed technological changes are ulterior motives backed by geopolitical reasons. Today we dive into a mind-blowing idea and the untold truth that could have transformed the face of the Earth. This is the plan to drain the Mediterranean Sea. Stay with me till the very end as we unravel the conspiracy around the ambitious Atlantropa project, a massive engineering endeavor, why it failed, and how it would have reshaped the world you and I live in. Let's begin with the man who is the brain behind Atlantropa. Sorgel was born in 1885 to a family of architects. He was a well-known Bauhaus architect and philosopher who reflected on culture, space, and geopolitics. During his lifetime, he did not create any famous architectural achievements, but his fame came through his ambitious scheme to dam the Strait of Gibraltar and reduce the Mediterranean Sea by 200 meters. The name given to this ambitious project is Atlantropa. The Atlantropa project entailed the construction of dams across the Strait of Gibraltar, the Dardanelles, and eventually between Sicily and Tunisia, each having massive hydroelectric power plants that would serve as the foundation for the new supercontinent. In its final form, the Mediterranean would be divided into two basins, with the western section dropped by 100 meters and the eastern part lowered by 200 meters, and a total of 660,000 kilometers of new land reclaimed from the sea, an area greater than France. Later ideas for Atlantropa included the construction of two dams across the Congo River and the establishment of a Chad and Congo Sea, which Sorgel felt would have a moderating effect on the African climate, making it more pleasant for European inhabitants. In keeping with the colonial and racist sentiments of the period, Sorgel saw Africa as a continent with plenty of space to accommodate Europe's huddled masses, with all of its resources and territory at its disposal. Additionally, Sorgel contended that the dams would supply enough hydroelectricity to provide Europe with all of the power it required, and that without the water flowing into the Mediterranean, natural evaporation would eventually create an extra 357,900 square miles of new land. A third dam would be erected later between Sicily and Tunisia, dividing the Mediterranean into two basins and providing a road bridge between Europe and Africa. To completely comprehend this, let us look at how Sorgel came up with this absurd concept. Going back to the year 1914, Sorgel was unprepared for the horrors of the Great War while working as an architect and journalist. His architectural training was at the Bauhaus School, and his interests included philosophical notions about culture and place about geopolitics. War appeared to be a total collapse of both of these, a destructive force that ripped through the globe, leaving nothing remaining. It was enough to convert him into a self-proclaimed pacifist. But he intended to go one step further. He wanted to manufacture war out of existence, not merely reject its legitimacy. This, according to Sorgel, was an urgent concern. According to him, three superpowers would rule the future: one across the Americas, another a Pan-Asian bloc in the Far East, and most dangerously, a considerably weaker post-war Europe in the midst, now incapable of resisting the other two. Sorgel stated that the inspiration for Atlantropa came to him in 1927 while reading the work of his compatriot Otto Jessen, a professor of geography at the University of Tübingen. So what motivated a renowned German architect to develop such a ridiculous notion that would alter the flow of nature? We will find out soon. The Atlantropa proposal appears to be a response to the continent's congested landscape and dwindling resources. The land was scarce. Material riches were being extracted at a rapid pace, and energy sources were intensely disputed. The Great War's losers, including Germany, were in a deeper hole, having lost both lands on the continent and colonies abroad. Sorgel anticipated that his big initiative would transform all of that, putting an end to resource scarcity and bringing Europe and Africa closer. Sorgel believed that unless something radical was done, Europe would be unable to compete with the land and resource-rich continents of Asia and the Americas. His idea exemplified a simple, if incorrect, maxim: if you can't import resources from other areas, bring the land to you. The plan's sheer size, however, proved to be Sorgel's fatal flaw. Securing resources for Europe's future needed today's expenditure of a continent's worth of resources. Let's have a closer look at how Atlantropa would influence people and life itself. Atlantropa was nothing better than a perpetual motion machine, yet it would still bring forth tremendous sorrow, disaster, and perhaps the end of the planet. Sorgel was persuaded that only alternative energy sources to fossil fuels could avert severe economic crises, which would eventually lead to internal societal disputes and hostilities between states. It was a pan-European initiative that would have altered the old continent's socio-political system by establishing a new supercontinent. A technical breakthrough that would have supplied not just more habitable and arable land, an infinite supply of clean and renewable power secured by multiple dams, but also the formation of a unified Europe, socially and culturally evolved as a result of technological advances. Soergel had a stroke of inspiration in 1927 when he read that the flow of water from the Atlantic Ocean via the Strait of Gibraltar keeps the level of the Mediterranean constant. So, to isolate the Mediterranean basin, why not construct a massive barrage between Africa and Spain, as well as two smaller ones in the Dardanelles Strait and at the mouth of the Nile? As a result of evaporation, the water level would have fallen, leaving significant areas of land exposed. Large hydropower plants on the dams would have provided Europe with a vast quantity of electricity. But despite the plot and supposed advantages, Atlantropa would have had disastrous ecological effects on the planet. The mad idea would have dramatically changed Europe and the world, as well as subjected Africa to cruel exploitation by the European empires of the time, who lusted for its oil and gas treasures. Soergel considered this a surefire win and a masterstroke of geoengineering, since it would solve all of humanity's problems by merging Africa and Europe into a new supercontinent. If you're wondering about Soergel's motivations here, know that these were the beliefs of a determined European colonist, a white supremacist, and very definitely a Nazi. Even if Atlantropa could have been physically realized for a short period, the effects on global climate would have been disastrous. The new dry and salty desert sea would have attained temperatures of up to 80 degrees Celsius, compared to the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth, which was just 54 degrees Celsius. This scorching heat would sear the region around Kuwait into a harsh, dry wasteland where nothing would survive. And it would only get worse. Simply emptying the Mediterranean by a few hundred meters would cause terrible climatic disasters, as well as a decline in fish numbers. Underwater habitats would be devastated since they rely on freshwater breeding grounds. Once much of the Mediterranean was drained, the heat exchange between Europe and the jet stream flow, which carries heat north from the southern hemisphere, would be far less efficient, resulting in rapid desertification of the European plain and southern Europe from Albania and Greece south to Lithuania in the north, and to Berlin from the Ural Mountains, making them as dry as the Mojave Desert. Guess what? If Atlantropa had succeeded, the Mediterranean would exist as a real-life Tatooine, with low-lying dunes trapping hot air and broiling everything around it. If that wasn't awful enough, the suddenly arid European continent's soul would be washed away in gigantic continent-spanning mudslides, as powerful storms caused by air currents around the outside of the enormous heat bubble roiled most of Europe and northern Africa. It would cause massive and persistent downpours, covering the region in mudslides, but the rains would rapidly evaporate, leaving nothing but a baked dead landscape of lifeless sand. As if all of that wasn't horrible enough after tremendous dryness and the likely annihilation of most of European and African life. This vast new desert, now incapable of sustaining life or moisture, would also become incapable of retaining any heat, potentially resulting in another global glacial event covering the Earth in ice. We know this because it happened before. Deserts which, while hot during the day, become cold at night. Instead of a lush and wet continent, a wide desert would reflect most sunlight into space, forcing any residual liquid to freeze and sublime away. Furthermore, the continent would be too dry and frigid to melt the glaciers that would swiftly emerge as a result of rains from the north, leading to a feedback process that might potentially blanket the Earth in ice. This similar scenario occurred roughly 2 billion years ago during the Great Oxidation Catastrophe, when the Earth lacked plant life to battle the invasion of ice sheets as the Earth chilled. It took about 300 million years for the Earth to warm up again in that event. The ice age caused by Atlantropa may not have been severe, but it may have ended human civilization as we know it. But the execution and success of this great idea was still subject to the Nazis' approval. Interestingly, Soergel's proposals were rejected by the Nazis, whose expansionist goals were geared more toward the east than the south. As a result, the concept lasted till World War II, but was finally made obsolete by the arrival of nuclear power and the end of colonialism. Soergel continued to defend his principles to the grave. Soergel was murdered in a hit-and-run accident while cycling to deliver a lecture in Munich on Christmas Day 1992. The route was allegedly as straight as a die, and the driver was never located, prompting some of Soergel's fans to believe he was assassinated by opponents of his idea. After Soergel's death, there was some discussion about Atlantropa, but it eventually died out. The Atlantropa Institute was abolished in 1960. However, the concept survived. The Man in the High Castle was released just 2 years later. It was an alternate history written by American science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, in which the Nazis' triumph in World War II drained the Mediterranean to construct farmland. The Atlantropa project is now a quirky footnote in history, a notion that no one takes seriously anymore. It demonstrates that individuals have long sought answers to the difficulties that continue to plague European affairs. Climate change and immigration, which are currently hotly debated, caused comparable anxiety and sparked radical ideas a century ago. If you find value in the content we provide in this channel, please leave a comment down below. Don't forget to share your thoughts about the A380. To get the latest updates, kindly hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.